so I was just suggesting that if the panelists introduce themselves with your name, pronouns, how you identify, and yeah, something about you, either, you know, it could be something fun, a fact about you, or something that you do for work, just to provide some context for people who are watching this at home. The order you've changed in now has changed, so I'm going to still go anti-clockwise. I'm going to actually start with Owen, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I'm Alan. I'm genderqueer. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm trying to think of a fun fact about myself. But I mean, the funnest thing I could think of is I'm on the local council, which isn't fun unless you're really nerdy like me, but there you go.
Thank you. And Jenny Ann?
Yes, hello everybody. I'm Anne Bishop from North Wales. I manage a couple of trans support groups. I'm on the Parliamentary Forum and the Welsh Equality Plan Board, and I work with WISC in Cardiff and Wales to ensure the new Welsh Gender Service is working properly. A fun fact about me, my hobby is railways, and I once drove a very big locomotive in Outer Mongolia on the main line.
That's a very good fact. Alex?
I'm Alex. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a trans man. And I always struggle with this one. Fun fact. I love traveling, just love traveling everywhere.
That's cool. And Shash?
I'm Shash. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a trans woman living in Cardiff. Fun fact about me is my girlfriend uses me as a walking advertisement for her earrings. That's about it, really.
Also, you've got a very professional looking mic.
Yeah. I bought it
like
in
proper.
I bought it in the intention on sometimes doing something creative, but never amounted it to anything.
So this panel is part of the Virtual Pride event that's being recorded over a few weeks, and yeah, the purpose of this is it's called I think it's called Who Am I? Just great, I can't remember quite the name of it, but it's to focus on the experiences of trans or gender diverse people in Wales. And I think it's worth saying that at the time that we're recording this, it is a particular time for trans communities in the UK. There have been a series of protests across the country and rallies and demonstrations, largely because of halted reforms to the Gender Recognition Act, also because of some worrying comments perhaps coming from the Government Equalities Office that certainly caused anxiety in the trans community, and I think you know, several years of antagonistic media coverage in relation to the GRA. So I think it's worth saying for people who aren't maybe trans, who are less aware, is that this is a particular time, a difficult time for some trans people, but we'll hopefully be able to talk about the good and the bad and not be too gloomy. So yeah, it's about focusing on the experiences of being on the trans spectrum in Wales. And I was wondering if it would be worth saying first in terms of lockdown, how the panelists have felt that lockdown has affected their social life or the groups that they're with, and you know, if you've been able to hang out with people and mix with LGBT people online, or if there have been alternatives, or if you've been more isolated, or if there's been any positives. So I don't know if there's anyone that would want to lead on that about how they've experienced lockdown.
I'm happy to go first if you like, Shon.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, initially we thought it was going to be very, very difficult, and that everybody would feel extremely isolated. But we very quickly discovered in late March, because being older, we isolated quite early on, and we were aware that a lot of our friends in the older trans community were feeling isolated. We started doing virtual meetings, first by Facebook Messenger video, and then we decided to buy a license for Zoom. And we're now doing around 3 virtual meetings a week. It means we link up with people outside our usual geographic area, which is interesting and brings in some variety. And we've started to get people to do things. So once a month we have a belly dancing class, which is quite fun. We often show videos or run articles for people to comment about. And we ask people individually what they've achieved the last week, how they're feeling. So it's very like having a live meeting. We have also managed, with often a lot of tears, to get some of our older members to come online, and they now appreciate that, and they're using it to talk to their own families that they were isolated from. One negative thing we've seen with some of our older people who are carers for partners or for other members of the family who are elderly or disabled, is they are really struggling because their support workers can't come and support them anymore. And at least 2 people we know, their partners have ended up in care homes. And of course, they're extremely worried about having to live in a care home and the family can't visit. So a lot of good, and we're going to go on using Zoom when we come out of lockdown, because we can meet every week instead of once a month.
Yeah, that's good to know. So yeah, so there are some positives. Alex, have you found, obviously with the kind of restrictions on your social life, how has that been for you as like a younger trans person?
For me, it's been quite difficult because I'm so used to going out and meeting people all the time. Whether, like, I'm so used to like messaging someone and being like, do you want to do this today? Do you want to go to like a concert? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? Whereas now everything's kind of on hold. I think I've been working throughout lockdown, so I think that's like kind of been my safe haven, because if I wasn't working, it would have been a lot more difficult. And I know that quite a lot of people are struggling with that, like not being able to see each other, like, because you're always just stuck in otherwise, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think it's an interesting one, because I think a lot of the youth groups as well, what we've been hearing is that with like, we're talking about 16 to 25, is that not everyone's comfortable with video calling. And
yeah,
I think like sometimes instant messaging apparently services have been really popular, but obviously people don't always feel 100% comfortable, and particularly as well if they're locked down with family who maybe aren't as comfortable with them being trans as you know. I was going to ask Owen the same thing actually.
Yeah, well, I was just finding that. I mean, the lockdown, I think, as Jenny Ann said, has brought a lot of good, and we've, I certainly know in my local area up in Bangor, we've had a lot more people sort of reaching out over instant messaging. But a lot of the circles that I navigate through in terms of LGBTQ plus spaces intertwined with university students. It's just the nature of the city. Of course, there are LGBTQ plus people local to Bangor, myself included in that group. But a lot of the people we talk to are students, and a lot of them had to, at the beginning of lockdown, move back home. And this was stressful for all sorts of reasons. I mean, it's interfering with their ability to complete their degrees and stuff. But a lot of people were out at uni, but not out at home. And so for them to suddenly go to an environment where they felt like they couldn't be themselves, we get a lot of messages of them finding it tough. When their parents or family aren't home, they're able to sometimes join us on Zoom meetings, and it's really nice. And this is the good that Jenny Ann was talking about. We are able to have a laugh and make them feel themselves again. But I think what we might see when lockdown ends is when people start moving back. What I'm hoping is when we can be more social, we're going to have more people more active and celebrating who they are, because they've been sort of reminded what it's like to not be like that, which is tragic. But it means that there's, I think, hope moving forward, that the people who are struggling now in lockdown know that the good is on the horizon. And I think it's getting a lot of people through, which is you know, all we can really hope from a situation like this.
Yeah, and Shash, I was wondering as well, because I think what a lot of people have done is gone online and they've replaced, you know, perhaps social groups or their friendship groups with like Facebook groups. Some of that positive, but also we know that there's a lot of transphobia online too. And that, you know, it can be a risky place, the online sphere, and people are spending a lot more time online now. How are you finding use of social media?
It's tricky. I think, like, especially with the current climate of like the leak about the GRA reform and then BLM also happening. For me in particular, it's been difficult to navigate social media, especially because there's constant barrage of either police violence and stuff like that, or racism or transphobia. And I know that's been quite taxing for a few trans POC people in general. But we've been trying to, so like I manage like a Facebook group. I also manage like a Discord server, and those kind of things are maintained to be like safe spaces in general. And it's meant to be a place where people can vent, gather, and stuff like that. And we also help signpost, try and keep things, you know, obviously keep things intersectional too, if anything like that occurs. But yeah, a lot of the time we try to, I think it's an issue of trying to like reach out to people who seem to be lonely or anything like that. And a lot of the time they do. Luckily, people still vent about their loneliness online, which is quite nice. So we can obviously just contact them and say, oh, join this server if you feel like it, because Discord has the benefit of having instant messaging, posting pictures in like a group format. You can jump into the voice chat, that kind of thing. So it's been really handy to talk with people. We've also been trying to have some sort of, we've also been organizing, surprisingly, during lockdown. Like we started a mutual aid fund kind of thing within trans people in Wales, and that's been going quite well. We're hoping to keep going with that. We've distributed over £2,000 to other trans people across Wales, to try and, you know, alleviate, whether it be their GoFundMes or whether it just be for rent, or just, you know, people struggling because of lack of work or during COVID or whatever be the case. But yeah, it's just trying to keep people practicing self-care and stuff, because I know there's a lot of, especially on Twitter, I see it, people, you know, transphobia has been kind of skyrocketing recently, and yeah, it's trying to get people away from that and trying to foster in like community reliance on the community rather than the forces that be, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. And yeah, I think there's a huge question here about, I think, mental health and people having to manage in quite, like, as everyone says, unprecedented times, and particularly in a community where sometimes, yeah, for a variety of environmental reasons, people have problems, higher rates of mental health problems. Health generally, though, is an interesting one. We were speaking just before, Shash and I, about before we sort of came on to record. Obviously, for not all trans people will be looking to go through the medical process, but the new Welsh Gender Service obviously had to initially delay appointments. But Shash was just telling me that actually they are starting to see people again now. And obviously, healthcare is a huge thing in Wales. And I know that Jenny Ann works like on the stakeholder group. But yeah, in terms of how people feel about their experiences of healthcare, not just transition related healthcare, but health in general in Wales. Does anyone have any particular, you know, experience that what they feel that their experience of healthcare in Wales has been?
Yes, we've had quite a lot of interaction with the healthcare system. Our health board has been really good at trying to involve everybody in setting up voluntary services. For instance, we were struggling because you're not allowed to go to the surgery to get your medication. on your repeat prescription, and you have to queue for at least half an hour to get in the pharmacy just to ask them to send in the repeat. We discovered that we could sort things out online, and now we don't have to go anywhere. It gets delivered to us, which is really good. And we've also found other people who are struggling to get, for instance, their hormone injections. We've referred them to the local gender team here in North Wales, and people have been sent to the 2 prescribing GPs who've looked after them. So that's really starting to work. I'm really pleased that we got the system in place before the lockdown. We do get a lot of people saying, I'm going absolutely stir crazy, and we try and involve them. We have a system where a number of people in the group ring people regularly and give them support. And sometimes you can, within the distancing rules, you can go round and talk to them in their garden, as we have done with a couple of people.
Thank you. And one thing though, I suppose, is for people who are wanting a first appointment, one issue that's the case across the UK, and Wales is no exception, is that obviously that there are very long waiting times. It can be very frustrating for people. I don't know if I come to Alex, if you found accessing healthcare has been timely, or if you felt like it was too long, or kind of how you navigated that process.
So yeah, I got referred, I think it's coming up to 3 years now for my first appointment, and I'm still waiting. So I've been going private for God knows how many years. But I still wanted to like kind of go through the NHS route, because it's so much easier, because I can't get my injections done in the doctors. I got to do them myself. It's like even more complicated going private. But yeah, I'm still waiting for my first appointment. But I got referred for a hysterectomy at my local hospital, and the nurses there just didn't have a clue. So I was looking for the where to go for the appointment, and the nurse was like, well, you shouldn't be here. And I was kind of like, but I've got an appointment here. But they were like, so like, you shouldn't be here. And I was like, I've got an appointment here. Like, please look at my name and tick me off and tell me to sit down, sort of thing. Like, I don't think they've had enough kind of like education, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And actually, I was going to ask Owen as well, because I think whereas trans men and trans women who sort of medically transition tend to be maybe slightly what the average trans person is to doctor, those doctors who do know, people who are genderqueer or non-binary often find that they have like specific barriers sometimes in healthcare, because doctors just don't understand it or understand it enough, or understand. I don't know if you or people you know who fall under the kind of non-binary umbrella, if there are specific experiences in Wales that you find it is a bit more challenging.
Yeah, so I mean the initial challenge is, of course, the fact that we're not legally recognised, which, you know, kind of puts a big stumbling block on anything. I mean, on some official forms, they let you put they, them, which is nice, because it knows you're not going to be misgendered on a regular basis when accessing these places. But because they don't recognise us, we still have to feel like we have to conform to cisgender society's version of what it means to be trans. You know, I mean, I've got friends who are non-binary, who are looking at surgery options and stuff for them, and they're really worried that in order to jump through the hoops to get it on the NHS, they're going to have to lie and say, oh, I'm binary trans, just so they can get ticked off, just so they can have all the things that they need doing to themselves. And it's quite a ridiculous situation, combined with the excessive waiting lists and the fact that it costs a lot of money to go private, when private, you know, is sort of a lifeline for many, because it does allow the process to be faster. Like I myself, I still don't know exactly what options I want to go for and how I want to progress moving forward. But I was trying to put some money away, because I knew if I do want to follow through with any medical care, private is going to be where I go. And then, of course, during lockdown and during everyone losing their jobs, if you were not furloughed, if you were made redundant like myself, you found yourself spending those savings you'd done on stuff that you were just on day-to-day stuff to survive. And suddenly medical care is even further away. So there definitely is a systematic problem in which, you know, for all members of the trans community, but I think especially non-binary people have the extra worry that because society doesn't even really know what we are, who we are, they're going to be even more resistant to giving us the medical treatments that will be life-saving for so many people.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Shash, I was wondering just if you have any particular experience with the NHS, how you found your experience too, because it's obviously a huge aspect of.
Yeah, I've been pleasantly I don't really want to say surprised, but because I knew the work behind the new pathway in Wales has been, you know, it's been going for a long time, and it's the reason that it is as good as it is. But I've been like genuinely quite happy with my experience with Welsh Gender Service so far, and I I'm saying because I was self-medding until what just like just when lockdown, like until like a month after lockdown started, I was still self-medding till then. And I was lucky enough, I had my first appointment before lockdown started, and I was lucky enough to, because I was in that weird in between, because I'd been signed off for hormones, but obviously I hadn't had like a second appointment or whatever to get the ball rolling. Luckily, I was that weird in between people. There was people who would acknowledge that and then got things sorted quite quickly. And I've now come to now. I've had a signature for surgery now. I've been, and that was done through Zoom. It wasn't done face to face. Then there's been obviously, as Jenny Ann said, issues with injections. In fact, so I had to initially in Cardiff, the injection was at the Welsh Gender Service itself, which isn't usually the case. However, the usual prescribing doctor and surgery was turned into a COVID center, hence the new change. But that's changing back now. I had a call with the doctor there, and they've said like, yeah, we're starting to get things back up and rolling. In fact, I feel like so far I've like, I know I'm pretty proud of that, the fact that what we've got in Wales does seem like a really good standard of care and for trans people, and I hope that expands to people who are under 18. And I hope and it seems there is good training as well, because I've had stories of people who've said that like, oh, my GP doesn't know quite what to do, but they'll talk to another GP within the practice who's been to the training and then be like, oh yeah, no, you got to refer to, if they're not comfortable as a practice doing the injections or whatever, they'll go to the prescribing GP and get things sorted. So I mean, it's not perfect. I'm not expecting a perfect system, but it is miles better than anything. And I'm so like, I feel confident in saying, like, to especially people who want to go through a medical transition, say, instead of having to like warn them about, oh, you need to say this and this to a psychiatrist, you know, you need to say these specific words or whatever, I can tell them, go to your GP, get referred, and you should, and then after a week or so, make sure you call the service and see if you're on the list. And that's all I have to do. And there is so much support within the service itself that a lot of the time it's not trans people doing the legwork, like trans people who are not in the service itself doing the legwork to help people. It's trans people within the service or cis people who are genuinely trying to help, actually helping people. And it's in fact, I think honestly I've had a better care with the Welsh Gender Service than the mental health care I've had on the NHS at the moment. So it's I mean, it's not been long, so, because I was waiting for Charing Cross before, and then for it to have changed within like a year, I guess. Like I knew it was, I expected it to be a bit of a slow transition.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's honestly just kind of amazing how it's turned out so far, and I hope it keeps going.
That's really helpful, and I think it's worth saying, because you obviously mentioned self-medding, and I think for perhaps cis allies or people who want to be allies, I think at home, it's worth explaining. I think that a lot of people don't realise, I think, who aren't trans don't realise that there's been these like historic delays, and that obviously, like Alex mentioned, private healthcare is a way that some people use to kind of start their transition earlier, but then I'm sure all of us probably know people who do self-medicate, where they either buy hormones online or and administer them. And obviously there's both an understanding of why people do that, but also there is a risk with that too, in that often people don't actually, you can't always verify, particularly if you order hormones online, what you're taking. And so so unfortunately it's a sort of byproduct of where there's been historic problems with trans healthcare, really, that people do it. But one thing I wanted to move on to discuss briefly, I think, is probably to put this in the middle of the session, really, is obviously it's popped up a bit when we looked at the lack of non-binary legal recognition, which was one of the proposals that Stonewall, among other LGBT groups, had hoped would come out of a reform to the Gender Recognition Act 2004, which was announced by the Theresa May government about 3 summers ago. There was a large consultation on that with over 100,000 responses, most of which were positive, but it's been a highly controversial, long drawn-out process, and there's no real sign of reform in England or Wales on the horizon right now. And I think that's something that's caused a lot. There's been a lot of misinformation about what the reform entails, and a bit of a backlash in the press. I think it would be worth just, I don't know if anyone has any immediate thoughts about their feelings around the lack of movement on the Gender Recognition Act. I don't know if anyone here has gone through the process, but it is, I have, it's a very long one. But yeah, I thought it'd be worth talking about that, really, because often we've heard a lot of misinformation, but not often people haven't really heard from trans people about what it means for them.
Yeah, if I could come in on this.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's a stereotypical argument, but a stereotypical topic, but it's the thing that I think most of us engage with a lot on an almost daily basis, is the one event that's probably, for me anyway, the scariest, which is, depending on the situation, what bathroom do I use when I'm out in public? It sounds trivial, and I know it's sort of always brought up, especially by transphobes, but they have successfully created an environment where suddenly the entire wider society is desperate to make sure that, the so-called trans predator isn't in their bathroom. And this is, I think, how the GRA was, one of the main reasons the GRA was taken down. It was by these lobbying groups who lied that self-ID will lead to predators in our spaces. I mean, you just have to look at the countries that have legalized self-ID to know that this is not the case. But they've really created this culture of fear. They've created a culture of fear amongst cisgender people who just don't know any better. I wouldn't call every single person who worries about a trans predator as a transphobe. If you've never been exposed to it, to educating about trans issues, you can be persuaded by these arguments. You just have to learn better. But it's the people who are actively promoting these arguments that is where the problem lies. And it also is sort of a catch-22 in and of itself, especially for me, who's gender non-binary. People tell me, oh, well, what bathroom do you use? Just because you're gender non-binary doesn't mean you can use the female bathroom. And it's like, well, I don't really want to. I want to use a gender-neutral space because that's what fits me. But then they refuse to amend the GRA to make us legal, to make non-binary genders legal, at which point, if they did that, institutions would legally have to put in services for us. So they're like, no, we can't have this reform. It will make predators in our bathrooms. It's like, all right then, well, I guess it means I'll still have to continue using a bathroom with you, even though I would personally also rather use a separate one. They don't know what they want to do, and it's very, very frustrating. I'm sure all of you feel the same.
Yeah, I mean, Shash, I was going to come to you just to, because I think a lot of the fear of it, the misinformation is about, they say about male predators in female spaces, but often that quite quickly becomes actually about trans women and the distinction they have between men in dresses and trans women. It's actually kind of say they mean trans women. Is it something that, you know, do you feel that kind of misinformation makes you feel more nervous in public space in Wales? I mean, obviously with lockdown, it's not really so much now, but in the last few years, or have you found? I've sometimes found that people are more accepting outside, in the newspapers, kind of. Very coolly.
I feel like obviously as trans people, we're kind of exposed to that kind of transphobia a lot more, and it's kind of sometimes it's hard to shake that. Not necessarily most of society isn't. Well, most of society really doesn't care. To be honest, they're just kind of like most cis people have their own problems to deal with. I don't think they particularly concern themselves about what bathroom trans people use. Fortunately, obviously there are the vocal few who seem to think it's their job to figure out who goes where. But yeah, it's tricky because I do feel that kind of wariness, and it's not helped by the fact that there is obviously there's transphobic stickering and that kind of thing, and there's the my biggest worry especially is like especially with like recent protests and stuff. I mean, it's not as much of a issue here in the sense of in America with arrests and things like that. However, I know trans people who are very vocal and do want to be good allies, but I am very worried about them getting arrested. And one of the things that a GRC affords you, especially if you go to prison or anything like that, it affords you to say that you go to the prison, gendered prison that you say you are. And obviously, the police, with its institutional racism, also has some institutional transphobia, and there's been many documented cases of transphobic abuse perpetuated by the police, and it's just it scares me in the sense that not only do people who who technically can apply for a GRC and that's mostly binary trans people, whereas non-binary people are left out in the dust essentially for this, and it kind of scares me. And that's not just well, obviously there's a few things obviously GRC affects, well, there's prisons, and there's obviously the bathroom debacle, and then the other thing is marriage. One of the weird things I've realized is I'm engaged, and if me and my fiance get married, technically it'd be a het relationship because I was assigned male at birth and she was assigned female at birth, and that weirdly enough is a lesbian erasure, if you will. So the exact thing that TERFs are supposedly fighting against is they're perpetuating essentially, and it's not helping anyone or by trying to roll back this GRA reform. And in fact, I've realized, like recently, I feel, if anything, the heightened news coverage has made it more tricky, because I feel like before all this, weirdly enough, that people really didn't care. And like, I feel like it's given ammo for bigots to be more vocal about it, be a bit like almost legitimize them to an extent, of calling out people, not necessarily trans people, about what bathroom they use and such. And I'm trying to tell trans people, because they're genuinely worried about this, and about like the whole bathroom bill and people policing their genitals or whatever. Sorry, please ignore my cat. And it's like, it's not going to happen. Because it's completely unenforceable, and if they did try to enforce it in any way, cis people are going to be affected, and once cis people start being affected, it's just going to go out the window, and it's not a realistic thing that's going to happen. And I feel like North Carolina is actually a really good example of this, where they've had not issues with the bathroom bill, but not only is it trans people protesting, is that surprising the businesses. They're like, this is just not enforceable for us as businesses. We don't know what to do here. and they're like, please repeal this bill because it makes no sense, essentially. And I feel like I think it's become wrapped in its own kind of dog whistles and transphobic dogma, and it's just kind of, it's drifting away from the point that it's just kind of like, this is just trying to make some bureaucratic nonsense slightly easier for people it affects, and that's it at the end of the day.
I was going to say, we spoke a little bit about the effect for non-binary people, but another group really that's, I think, really been silenced in some of the controversy around the Gender Recognition Act is trans children and young people. Certainly, like, I feel, even I felt in the past, I've tried to be better about it more recently, but I think for trans adults, we can be made afraid of speaking up for trans children, because it's very easy to paint us as kind of recruiting, like that kind of old myth that used to be applied to gay people, is that we're recruiting young people to be trans people, or there's a social contagion. But I've tried to overcome my own fear around that. And I was going to come to Alex only because I think while a lot of the focus on bathrooms and stuff like that focuses on trans women, for trans men, particularly younger trans men, I think a lot of the panic around people being misled into transition or transition regret in the media, a lot of that focuses on trans men, and it tends to infantilize them. Is that something that you agree with, or?
Sorry, will you explain a little bit more?
Yeah, I was just wondering what your thoughts were about there tends to be a media narrative that, like, particularly young trans men are actually lesbians who've been misled into transition, or there seems to be a bit more of a panic about teenage trans boys and men and younger trans men, would you say? Right.
I know in my experience on like social media and stuff, that has been one of the things that's often said to me, is that I'm just like this confused little kid when I wasn't back in the day. Like, nobody could have influenced me because I don't think I know any, well, at the time I didn't know any of the trans people. Like, nobody, I didn't know anyone. And again, like, we're all supporting each other. Like, if I support somebody who's 17, just come out, I'm known as the predator. When that's not the case, I'm kind of like trying to guide them through, trying to give them advice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Like, it's just like, yeah, like, whereas trans women face the whole bathroom side of things, trans men, we're just lesbians that want to have top surgery. Do you get what I mean? Like, it just...
Yeah, it's a different, it's an interesting one, because I think a lot of people think that transphobes always ignore trans men, but I don't think they do. I just think it's that some of the myths that they make are different, and it affects, transphobia can look different ways for trans men and trans women. I don't know, Jenny Ann, if you feel, I know your group is mostly adults, but you probably work with groups that work with trans young people. If it's a difficult time for trans young people and their families in Wales now.
Yes, we do, and we team up, particularly up here in North Wales, with Viva, who work with young LGBT people and have 3 different trans groups in different parts of North Wales, which we support. We also have a trans community house, which is sometimes used for homeless people, and we've had at least 1 young person come through the house. And what we find in the main, there are exceptions, but most people are not bothered about bathroom bills or policing bathrooms. They're too busy getting on with their own lives, and it's just the occasional activist from the other side who tries to upset things. I remember somebody having a go at me, and I said to them, so you expect me to go and use the male facilities? And I've got gender recognition. And it was like, oh, not you, Jenny Ann, you're all right. And I said, well, then who are these people who aren't all right? And they couldn't define it. And as Alex was pointing out, what are they going to do if trans men have to use the female facilities.
Mm.
That really opens the door to predators who can just pretend they're trans.
Yeah.
It's a total nonsense. When I first came out, and I'm a bit of an oldie, I was first out in 1970, so a very long time ago. And in those days, you could be arrested if you used the wrong facilities for behaviour likely to cause a breach of the peace. Fortunately, I never was, and I just got on with my life. And most of the time, the women in the facilities I used would chat to me just like any other woman. So I've not seen that problem. And I've always said, if you behave reasonably, don't try and mess things up, then you can just get on with your life. And we've had one or two events we've organised where the trans women have not behaved appropriately in the ladies, and we've had to sort of say to them, look, if you're going to use the ladies, don't go and stand on the at the loo with the door wide open. That is not the way to behave.
That's it. I guess the issue there is that's the difference. Is I think it's an important distinction between problematic behaviours and people, and not problematic groups. And I think it's always worth saying that, you know, that there will be people in any community who will behave inappropriately, who aren't nice people. There are trans people like that too. But I think because we're such a small community, it's very easy for people to be very selective with examples, and to use that to kind of like misrepresent the whole community. And I think that's something that happens in the media a lot, is that they pick one or two sort of stories, and then they use that as emblematic of the whole community. And just Weather's recording I just want to check, because I don't know if we're having questions, because I want to allow some time questions. If I think people submitted questions in advance, but I'll wait for him to maybe in the group chat let me know about that. In the meantime, I thought it would be useful. It's a very typical panel discussion question, is that a lot of the people watching this, I imagine, if they're cis LGBTQ people, basically think, what can I do? It's the classic panel question. What can I do more to help be an ally? Or, you know, what is it that that's helpful? And I think it would be worth us all answering this, really, is if you've got any kind of concrete examples of like what people have either done for you, or you've heard of them doing for, you know, trans people generally, or you personally, that you actually think, yeah, this is helpful. This isn't just making the cis person feel better. It actually did directly help me. And as specific as possible would be great. I don't know if anyone wants to start, because I don't want to put anyone on the spot if you need to think about it. But
yeah, give us money, I think, is one of the easiest things. I honestly, like, people, I know, especially, I've been coming around to like, not like asking for money, because there's always kind of this stigma of like, oh, don't give money. And I've seen it just, it's been terrible. And like, and what I mean is, just a lot of the time, literal money can make a huge difference to someone's a trans person's life, because a lot of our like financial decisions have to be made within with taking our trans status in mind a lot of the time, and whether that be medical care, or whether that be just navigating society, or surgery, or whatever. And like, because there's systemic discrimination against trans people, I've known people who've been denied jobs because they were trans, or they've gone to the interview stage and they've been they don't pass for whatever reason, and then they've been, oh, although they're a completely qualified candidate, they'll be like, oh, they're out of job. And similarly, I've heard of people being discriminated from landlords, that kind of thing. So a lot of the time, money makes a huge difference, and we like donate to mutual aid funds, donate to people's GoFundMes, and there's a reason there's trans people as a demographic are just socioeconomically underprivileged, and it's because of the systemic discrimination. And a lot of that, honestly, can be solved with money. And it's unfortunately how our silly capitalistic society works at the end of the day. So yeah, and another thing is just when you see transphobia, just don't let it pass. Call out transphobia from family and that kind of thing. And that's just not transphobia, but other forms of bigotry too. And another thing also, I guess, is practicing intersectionality. So I know a lot of cis allies and cis activists, they might run their own for a particular kind of, whether it be BLM or whether it be something like women's rights or whereas it's just a gay activism, that kind of thing. A lot of, or like homelessness. I've seen a lot of things where they've just like, they haven't thought of what intersectionality really means. And it's, I think I see this a lot now. It's not intersectionality isn't an additive, it's reconstitutive. So you've got to work from the ground up and realize that it's not, so when I say I'm trans and brown, yes, I face discrimination from being brown. Yes, I face discrimination from being trans, but there's a compound of discrimination that I uniquely face from being trans and brown. And that's kind of things that get left in the, left at the side. And it's that kind of stuff that really helps people who feel marginalized, because at the end of the day, although we're all trans here, it doesn't mean that's our only facet of our identity for whatever reason. Some people are, and it's understanding whatever activism or help you're trying to do, that you understand that a person's not only just trans, there are also other things that could be affecting them. Yeah, essentially. But yeah, give us money, essentially.
That's nice and simple. I mean, it's easy to do if you have it. Owen, what would you say?
Well, I mean, I'd obviously echo what Shash said and say that money can be useful, but a lot of people don't really have the disposable income, which is why other avenues are important. And I think it's a simple one, and it's simple for everyone to do, but it can make a big difference, is just be complimentary. For example, like when I was out in Canal Street, I think a year and a half ago, I was very newly out at that point, and it was really the first time I was expressing myself how I really wanted to express myself. And the compliments that I got just made the world of difference, because I think a lot of people, I know certainly I do, have an internal monologue which goes something like, well, I mean, what if somebody clocks me? I don't really pass. It might be the same for people who've jumped through all these surgery steps. I don't know, but I know for me who hasn't, I'm worrying constantly. I was like, oh, I'm just going to be seen as a dick in a dress or whatever. So when somebody compliments you and says, oh, you look pretty, or oh, wow, that's a nice dress, or oh, where did you get that? Just interacted with us as a nice person, recognizing that, we are the gender we say we are. That can go a long way. And equally, if somebody comes to you that they're questioning, or if a cis person or an ally thinks that somebody might be questioning their gender, I know this happened to me, don't probe in it with like, oh, are you questioning? But sort of say, oh, you look nice, or you did this, or like, oh, what are you thinking? And just, don't be obtrusive in your questions and your compliments, but recognize that it might be a really big thing for somebody to get off their chest and they want to, but they don't know how to do it. And sort of be nice to them, bring up, like, the reason I came out actually is because I got very drunk and went to a party, a Halloween party, dressed up as Frankenfurter. And somebody said, oh, that was a really good costume, you look nice, you should wear fishnet stockings more often. And fueled by Dutch courage, I just sort of poured all the emotions I'd sort of pent up for the last, at that point, 10 years onto this person, just because they were being nice to me. And then they continued to be nice, gave me the confidence, because I already knew at that point I was genderqueer non-binary, I just hadn't come out to anyone. They gave me the confidence to start doing that. And the turnaround from their positive reaction to me publicly telling everyone was short, because they were supporting in that. So be nice, be complimentary, and just look out for people if you don't have the ability to help us financially.
Yeah, that's funny. I was like, your story about the Frankenstein thing makes me, I always joke that trans people have quite a special relationship to Halloween because I feel like lots of people use Halloween as a first foray into yeah, so it's a group trans feminine people. I feel like it's one of those days of the year where you're allowed to like essentially present in a more feminine way and it masks it. Alex, do you have anything that you would add or echo from Shash and Owen?
I think, like, going back to like before, like, be careful of the media with like the scaremongering. Like, I know so many allies on Facebook and Twitter and everything. Like, they share an article which is so transphobic, and I'm like, no, why did you share it? Like, they are in person good allies, but they don't read it. They see the title and they share it, and I'm like, oh no, read everything through. Like, ask me, ask somebody that you know that's trans. Just be like, what's this about? Like, have an open dialogue conversation before sharing stuff, because then that quickly spreads across social media. It's like wildfire once it gets on there. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just say support people, because like everybody needs support. Like, whether you're going through something that is trans related or isn't trans related, whether it's like something really personal, like, you need to have that support around you. So like, support trans people. Yeah.
No, that's really helpful. And that thing about not spreading, like, if you like, fake news or you know, really biased content is actually a really useful thing. I think sometimes there's some studies to show that if you constantly rebut certain talking points, you actually entrench them more. It's something they found with Trump in the US, is that sometimes in the attempts to try and, you know, you actually make it more of a talking point. So that was a really useful one. And Jenny Ann, I was just wondering as well if what you find particularly helpful from people who want to be allies.
Yes, I think that I have to agree with support and not circulating stuff that's transphobic or misleading. But I would go a step further and say, try to find out about things for yourself. Don't always rely on trans people. There are some groups like ours, and we do loads of trans awareness training, and we're very happy to do it because, hey, we've been doing it for 20 years and it doesn't worry us anymore. But other people may not want to divulge all their personal issues. It can drag up all sorts of feelings and make you feel depressed and worried. And I think, too, the other thing that's really important is include us in things. Make sure we're in the media and make sure trans people are seen out and proud. And one of the ways we do it is just to be out and about. All of you, just by being out there in the world, are a shining example of being positive as trans people. And I find that if I walk around looking happy and I smile and chat to people, most people are like, oh, trans people are just like us.
Yeah. Thank you for that. We're really almost at the end of, we've only got a couple of minutes. So I think what I thought would be a fun note to end on was very quickly is to go around and for everyone to say one thing they hope will have improved or changed or hope for the future about in the next 10 years for trans people in Wales and the rest of the UK. So if I'll go first, I mean, like, one, I hope that healthcare is, you know, in 10 years time is much quicker than it is now. But also I would really like there to be a British television program that's actually good with a trans female character played by a trans woman, because that's still, like, you know, hasn't actually happened. So definitely that's something like that where I feel like we have entered the mainstream a bit more, which has happened in America, but not quite on British TV. Does anyone else have something like that to share?
Going on the theme of the TV shows, I want like an irreverent comedy for where trans people are like the protagonists, but it's just incredibly just relatable, and you're just sitting there just going and just watching, just like it just goes on, and that's all I want. I don't want anything else really. I think
Okay.
I think that's what I dream of. I want to be able to just watch a program on TV and go, oh yes, that's relatable for once, and not feel left out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There was a program that Rebecca Root did called Boy Meets Girl, and it ran to 2 series, and that was really tackling an awful lot of the issues. I remember there was a wonderful scene where she was in the bowling alley, and eventually the guys were getting really aggressive, and she just knocked one of them out. She said, well, I used to be a boxing champion. And I thought that is wonderful. You can never judge somebody just by looking at them. The thing I really want to change is what we've talked quite a lot about, is that young people can get a better service, and that is being worked on. So I'm sure it'll all be much better in 10 years. The whole point of the new system was to reduce waiting times, and eventually for everybody to have their first appointment in their local health board. And tied up with that, I want the British government to recognise non-binary people.
Thank you. And then, yeah, just Owen and Alex. I don't know who else.
Yeah, no, I'd echo what's said by Jenny there. It's like, yeah, it'd be nice to be legally recognised, I guess. I mean, I'm not, you know, and I also want gender neutral spaces as well, because again, it matches my gender and it matches other people's genders and stuff, but also to have a safe space like that. Yes, I also want to reach to a point where there is literally no fear, because I get that it's a vocal small minority who stir up the fear of trans people using gendered spaces. But until that fully goes away, having our own space as non-binary people, or for binary trans people who want to use them, we need that as well, because then we can actually engage in daily activities without having a completely stressful internal monologue. And also educating about trans and non-binary from a young age, so people don't have these questions, aren't so easily swayed by false arguments. I think that's, you know, that would be a 10-year dream alongside a good TV show, as already been said.
Great.
Shall I go?
Yeah.
I think the one thing within the next 10 years is hate crime. Like, for hate crime to be taken more seriously, like, when people get prosecuted more, like, because I know at the moment there's such a flaw within the system. Like, there's cracks so people fall through if there is hate crimes reported. I think as well, I'd like for representation for everybody in their own little way. So, like, trans women, trans men, and non-binary people, I think everyone needs their own little bit of representation more, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone. I feel like that's yeah, we've kind of hit time now. I was asked to point out to people as well who might be watching this that Umbrella Cymru runs a peer support service for people who are in the waiting list as well for the Welsh Gender Service. And I think there'll be more information by Virtual Pride about that, but I have asked to plug it, so I will. It's just to say thank you to all of you for doing this, and it's a bit weird, but I'm hoping that this event and panels like this will help people, obviously, who are still stuck at home and can't attend Prides this year. And it is really important as well to hear directly from trans people when they're spoken over so much in the media at the moment. So I'm really, really grateful for you for giving your time. And yeah, I hope it makes a difference to people. Yeah, thanks very much. And think we then can start recording now.